Thanks for tuning in to Zeroth Educate. In the first episode, Vidya spoke in detail about how to think about investing, how to have the right expectations, asset allocation, and how to pick equity funds and build that part of your portfolio. In this episode, Vidya talks about how to analyze and pick debt funds and how to think about debt funds. Given whatever is happening with debt funds, this is a really crucial aspect, so don't skip this part. Vidya has deep dives and explains how to monitor and maintain your portfolio so that you don't end up with a dud and useless funds and damage your prospects of reaching your goal. Please enjoy the second part of my conversation with Vidya. My name is Prateek Singh. So the next question I have, Vidya, for you is on dividends. A lot of people say, look, I will invest long term, but I also want to earn dividends. Now, mutual funds have two plans. We have the growth and the dividend. And I must urge people to go and see the chart of growth and dividend to see the NAV and how it makes a difference over, say, 5 or 10 years. But mutual funds can't issue dividends. So why do they have a dividend plan? Are they selling units? What's happening over here?
Right. So your dividend plans are nothing but taking out your profit in your fund from your NAV and giving it to you, right? So either it lies in your NAV or it comes to you. It has nothing to do with the dividends that the funds get from the stocks, right? So that's an important thing. Like if you hold stocks and you get dividend, you get those dividend from those stocks. It's not the same. The funds do get dividend from stocks. That's all added to your NAV, and at their will and when they deem fit, they may give a part of it to you. Now, what is the need? The need basically from a fund house perspective is to make you feel that you're getting something out of your fund, right? I don't want to get deep into, the issues with giving wrong indicators on dividend, calling it an income and so on. That's a very different kind of, discussion, and that used to be rampant, but thankfully now, because dividend has become taxable, this financial year, essentially your dividends are going to be very, very tax inefficient for you to take. You would rather have it in the fund and allow it to grow. And especially in an equity fund, the question arises, if you take out the dividend, which is nothing but a part of your NAV, it is equivalent to your selling some units, right? But it doesn't happen there. What happens there is it reduces your NAV. So every time you take it out, you're not allowing it to compound. It comes to your savings bank and it goes to Amazon Pay or Google Pay, right? Or whatever. So that's what you're going to do. So you're not allowing compounding to happen by having dividends. 2, equity is not a product where you keep taking out money. You're going to allow it to grow. And that's possible only with the growth option, not with the dividend option. 3, just don't even think about it henceforth because it's very tax inefficient. Earlier 2, there was DDT, there was tax being deducted. You never felt the pain because it was deducted from your NAV. Now it's going to be taxable in your hands, right? And 4th, for those having debt funds and thinking that they want a regular income, there is a good substitute called systematic withdrawal plan, where you just sell some units regularly, systematically, and take out the money. The beauty of a SWP is that only a part of it is considered your gain, the rest is your capital, and therefore only a part of it would be taxed. So it is highly tax efficient compared with your traditional, interest income from your deposits, and it will serve the purpose of getting income. As far as equity is concerned, there is no case for you to go for dividend when the idea of equity is to allow it to grow, right? So you can conveniently forget in very rare cases, like for example, thematic funds, right? Where you have a timing call in thematic simply because some themes, for example, infrastructure, all go through cycles. So you don't know when to exit, and a fund may give you heavy dividend when it has seen high returns. In those cases, it's possible that you are able to book profits because some dividend is had. But even those are all now out of fashion because none of those cyclical ones anyway perform, and they are so high risk. It's not worth for you to kind of just get into them to get some dividend. So forget dividend because it's not the way to compound and grow in equities. 2, they are highly tax inefficient. 3, if you need income from dividends, especially with debt funds, there are other ways like systematic withdrawal plans to do that.
Perfect. And I really like the point over here that, we must underline is that if you're choosing equity, you're choosing growth, you're choosing compounding, why would you want a quote unquote regular income or a dividend from it, right? You must choose growth. And if you want something like that, choose debt, right? Or a systematic withdrawal plan like Vidya said. Okay. So now let's move on to debt funds. Super safe, always good, no problem. This is what we thought up to a few months ago. So debt has been in the news for all the wrong reasons. Some debt funds even blew up and did horribly not well. So how do I know if I'm picking a debt fund? Could something really go wrong? How do I protect myself with this, Vidya?
Right. So debt fund. So equity, there is not much of time frame in equities in the sense that you have a minimum 5 year, 7 year, like I said, and anything over is good for you. But with debt, if you diligently follow a time frame based investing and choose your categories accordingly, it can be a lot more simpler and less concerning for you. What happened in the past happened primarily because people went into longer term products in debt thinking that they were for short term because their returns looked good. Their returns looked better than FDs. For example, a credit risk fund, right? Those are not products meant to be held for a year or two. They're meant to be held for 3 years or 5 years because when they take hits, that's a time that is needed for them to heal themselves, to get back to normalcy. But we never allowed it. The other thing is looking at high returns in shorter duration. Some shorter duration funds can show you very high returns simply because they have taken high risk, right? Yeah. So again, so in spite of having a proper time frame, you went for a short duration, you may still have been hurt. Now there are only two ways, to overcome this. One, don't get into debt funds if you don't understand, right? Very simple, because they are not FDs. They are not products where you can say with certainty that a fixed interest will come every time, right? There is a fixed interest on every instrument inside that product. However, because they are subject to market variations, because they are traded in the market, they will be volatile like your equity. So that's something that people need to understand. There is no return guarantee in debt. So if you are not comfortable with the idea of not having something that is fixed in its returns, you should not even come to debt funds, right? The second thing is, if you decide you want debt funds, stick to categories that you will understand. Probably it's hard to understand. Then how do I go about doing it? First thumb rule, do not pick funds that are high returning in debt. Right? Okay. It's as simple as that, especially if they are not government securities. I mean, if you're going with gilt categories, we'll talk about it separately. But in any other non-gilt category, a short duration fund, a medium duration fund, or a credit risk fund, high returns cannot come in these categories. Basically, there cannot be much return differentiation even within funds in debt, because by and large, the universe of investable instruments is very limited. So that basically means you cannot have much return differentiation. But for something very different that the fund manager does, that's not about skill, that's to do with risk in debt, right? So the more risk you take, the chances that you deliver more. So that risk you don't want to be taking because you don't understand those risks, right? Understanding the risk is a separate thing by itself. You get into a portfolio, you look at the kind of instruments, you look at their ratings, you look at what the rating agencies have said, and in spite of it, you may have a AAA instrument going to D suddenly, right? So those are the kind of risks that you face. It's very hard. Unlike equity markets beautifully sound you off, when a stock is not going to perform well. Equity, the stock gets derated, the market starts selling it, and all of those. These stories you will never know in debt, right? Because you don't know, the debt market is not vibrant. You don't know who's selling which bond. You don't know DHFL bond. People have been dumping it well before even events happened, right? So those are not stories that you will hear. So there's no way of alerting yourself to all of these. So the best you can do is, one, go to categories where you know for sure that the SEBI requires them to hold only high quality instruments, right? In spite of it, there'll be some duds here and there, but that's okay. So first stick to, for example, a banking and PSU fund, or a corporate bond fund, or a, gilt fund, and so on, where you know for sure that these categories are safe. Or for that matter liquid fund, because liquid fund aren't allowed to go to, longer duration risk-taking instruments or an overnight fund.
The market. Yeah.
Just go use the same metric of a fund that is consistently coming in the top quartile. It definitely should not be like 2 percentage points over the category average. Something is badly wrong. If you take your Franklin funds, that's exactly what happened. Franklin ultra short or low duration, forget the credit risk.
Yeah.
At one point, we're delivering 1.5 to 2 percentage points more than the category.
For the last 1 year, 2 years, for how long? How long should I
For 5 years. Even for 5 years, when this kind of return differential exists, it means the fund is consistently looking at, so you should obviously look at 1, 2, 3 and 5, 1, 3 and 5. Yeah. And if you see in all of these, the return differential is quite high. And that's why it's consistently coming at the top. It essentially means that there's something very different that the fund is doing, right? And this won't happen with your gilt or your dynamic bond, where there are duration calls. So there are essentially two kinds of risks with debt funds, right? The credit risk, which is what we are most concerned about now, and then the duration risk. The duration risks normalizes with time. Duration can be very, scary in 6 months, 1 year, because your fund can really fall when interest rate calls go bad, but then they normalize over time. But with credit, it is a 0 or 1. You either get your money back or you don't get your money back. There's no question of normalizing, right? So we focus more on credit risk as retail investors focus more on credit risk. Duration, simple thing. If you're going long with a gilt with 8-year, 10-year, 12-year maturity, you need to have a long time frame. 3 years, 5 years at least.
But ideally hold till maturity, right?
Ideally hold till maturity, but at least ideally hold till the period where it doesn't give negative returns. The same principles that we used for equity, right? So the chances of a gilt giving negative returns in 3 years is almost nil.
Yeah.
There have been very mild, minor like minus 0.5% returns still, even in 3 year periods, but it's almost nil. So you can take that chance, but you can't have a gilt for a 1 year believing that you're taking a timing call, right? Right now, many people are enamored by the double-digit returns in gilt, right? So it is like catching a stock at the peak.
Just like we did before, right?
So catching a gilt at the lowest of its returns is like catching a stock at the peak, right? So these are things that you need to understand with gilt, but it's not like you won't get your money back. So that's the biggest thing. But with credit risk, high return differential, where it is not a gilt fund or a government security focused fund, can essentially come only with credit risk. Leave them out. If you don't understand them, just leave them out. You don't need them. It's fine not to be able to get those 0.5%, 1 percentage point more. You cannot afford those risks, because when you park in 5 lakhs, 10 lakhs and you lose the money, that's a lot more riskier than trying to get this additional 50 bips returns. So simply look for steady performing funds around category average returns. And if you can, look at the portfolio, see if, most of the papers are in AAA or AA plus and above, and a good proportion in government or PSU or, kind of an exposure. Stick to them. And in general, going short term is very safe. Having short duration funds, even for long-term portfolio, is perfectly fine, right? I'll give you an example. The probability of liquid funds generating over 6% returns over 1 year time frames is 94%, right? The same probability, the probability with a short duration is only 83%. So that basically means a short duration fund over 1 year periods, can be quite volatile over 1 year periods, right? They may deliver higher over 3-5 year periods, but if you're happy with this, your liquid fund can give you 7% returns in a high interest scenario, but probably just over, your savings bank returns or even your FD returns over shorter durations, you should be fine with that, right? So these are basic things. And bottom line, most of us use debt to hedge our portfolios from the equity risk, right? As retail investors, we are highly exposed to equity. And the idea of debt is to provide us the hedge. The hard hitter part is going to be done by equity. You don't expect your debt to do that. Right?
Correct. So why do you want that extra 1%? Why do you want that extra 1%?
Exactly. You focus on your equity to get the optimal returns and you use your debt as hedge. So stay with products that you understand. Stay with lower duration if you don't want volatility. And 3, don't look at funds that are like giving you 1.5, 2 percentage points more than the category.
Perfect. So the next time you're going through an app trying to find the best fund and you sort by best returns, just stop and think about this conversation we had today.
And maybe scroll to somewhere down the middle than the top.
That's nice. So perfect. Find out the category average and try to find someone who's maintained roughly there for the last 5 years, if possible, if you have that data. Perfect. So let's move on to portfolio maintenance. Now, let's suppose someone has these funds and he has to maintain. Now, there's something called portfolio rebalancing, right? After a period of time, what do you do if you have funds in place, right? So of course, if you've built with your own stocks, you'd find a way to change the weightage and rebalance it. But with funds, how does rebalancing work? Should I worry about it? Should I not think about it? How does this work?
Okay. So two things here. One, reviewing your portfolio, and two, rebalancing. They're both interconnected in one way, because when you rebalance, you might also be changing funds that are not doing well, right? So reviewing is basically ensuring that your funds are performing consistently well. Your funds are able to beat the index, are staying at least at par with the good peers, and making sure basically you're not with a dud fund. Rebalancing essentially is about keeping your risk profile intact, and in the process making sure that you are not overexposed to an inflated asset. So many people, these are very technically putting it, very simply put, many of you will ask us a question, when should I book some profits? Should I reduce equity now? Should I, increase equity now? The market has fallen. What should I do? All that they're asking is a timing call, right? So is this a good time? These questions are best answered again by going inward, by looking at your portfolio and not really looking at the markets. It will solve a lot of trouble for you in terms of, trying to know too many things. Take your portfolio. It's a 70-30 portfolio, or 70-30 portfolio over a 5-year period, for instance. Maybe it has become 75-25 or 80-20, or even in 2 years it may have happened, right? Now, what has happened? Your equity has swelled. That's why a 70% equity has become 75% equity, right? So necessarily your asset allocation has gone out of whack for the simple reason one asset class has performed quite well. And when I say I'm rebalancing, I'm bringing that asset class back to where it was. Why should I do that? I'm doing it because I know this asset class is inflated. In my own portfolio, this asset class, when it has become 70 to 75, it means it has delivered a lot. Right? So I am booking profit. I am actually booking profit in an inflated asset class and putting it back in a deflated asset class. Right? It could be debt, it could be equity. So this is what I'm doing with rebalancing without even looking at the markets. I have no idea whether the market is high, the market is low. I'm looking at my portfolio, whether my portfolio has delivered or not. Right? If my portfolio has delivered, in general, by and large, looking at numbers and combinations, anything over a 5 percentage point growth in one asset class means that it has delivered a lot. And remember, it takes a long while even before that 5 percentage point is achieved. So please don't think every 6 months or 7 months this is going to happen. Hardly. Sometimes it takes years before you can even reach there. It takes sometimes a very swift equity rally. It might happen faster, but you don't have to keep watch for it. You have a calendar, you have a periodicity to it, like an annual calendar or a financial year period, and look at your portfolio, whether this asset allocation has undergone a change. Come what may. For example, 2008, 2007 end, December, you didn't have to know equity was inflated, equity was a bubble. Your portfolio would really have, even in a 1 year time frame, this 5 percentage point increase would have happened because that was the kind of rally we had, right? So your portfolio will tell you that it has crossed 75% or whatever, and you rebalance it. Without knowing in January 2008, there'd be a correction. Forget December. You didn't know anything about December. You look at it in March 2008, after the correction began. Your portfolio may still have been inflated. You would still be able to do this and keep your portfolio. So what happens by doing this? One, because you have booked profits, you have ensured that you are cashed in on all that had grown, and your portfolio is not going to be hit hard because your equity is removed to debt, right? So you are insulating your portfolio. In the earlier example that I gave, where between 2005 and 10, if I had been doing an asset rebalancing, I'm at the end of 5 years sitting with a higher amount. There will be years in between where your portfolio would have delivered less if equity rallies, simply because you didn't rebalance. For example, if there has been a rally, a 75% equity portfolio will deliver more than a 70% equity portfolio, right? Naturally. That's okay. That's okay, because there will be years, but what you have ensured is you have taken the profits. You're not just allowing it to remain as profits in book. You've taken the profits, you put it in the other asset class, thereby preserving your capital and your growth to some extent without exiting, right? The reverse is also true. When corrections happen, naturally it shows up and you will be putting more. So you don't even have to ask an analyst or advisor, is this a good time to enter the market? Your portfolio will tell you that. So this is essentially what rebalancing does. You do this annually, clinically, without having to, take macro and, market and technical, points. Just do it clinically. I'm not saying you will be with the best portfolio, but you will be with the most optimal portfolio that there is to achieve your goal. While you do this, naturally, you also have to look. So you need to exit some funds while you book profits. What are the funds that you exit out of? And that's when you get into reviewing your funds. Am I sitting with debt funds? Remove that first, right? How do you go about doing it? Has my fund been underperforming for at least the past 3 to 4 quarters? Let's forget the quarter, for the past 1 year, right? So you compare it with index, you compare it with peer, see why that underperformance. Underperformance could be because the fund has changed its strategy, could be because a fund manager has changed and brought in a new style which may not be working, and things like that. You need to give them time. So it's not like in 4 months, 5 months, you allow this to happen. You at least look for 1 year. And in that 1 year's time, if something is underperforming, don't try to immediately exit. Sometimes these things happen. You stop SIPs, watch them. Move the SIP to other funds or the better funds that you have, found. Keep these funds going and then look for another 6 months to 1 year to see improvement and then take a call. So this is about reviewing your portfolio, not necessarily churning every time you see underperformance, but keeping tab. And while you rebalance, you can always remove the dud ones while you're, changing the asset allocation.
Excellent. I think we went really deep into this, but I'm sure there are a lot of quantitative metrics, etc. we can also do. So if you guys have reached so far listening, I mean, give yourself an applause. I mean, it's been an hour almost. So good job. You're trying to improve your personal wealth. And maybe, who knows, Vidya can be doing a course with LearnApp also in the future. So maybe tweet if you think that's interesting. But we spent so much time with you, Vidya. We don't know you, right? So let's talk a little bit about you. Tell me your investing philosophy. How do you personally invest? And maybe 1 or 2 important lessons that you have learned through your own personal experience in the last few decades.
Right. So, I'm a very boring person, so there's not much to say about me, but, somebody, if you're looking at an accountant, a chartered accountant, what do you imagine? One of those serious. So that's how I started out. But thankfully, equity markets are something that, kind of fascinated me early on. And, I took to not the best way to invest, but IPOs were a craze way back then. And I'm talking of sometime in 2001-2, post Y2K, those periods. So I was investing in quite a few IPOs which clicked, which did well. And then equity investing continued. But what I must say is more than investing, I think spending matters a lot when it comes to building wealth, right? So I'm not a big spender, and that has really helped me. End of the day, it all boils down to how much you keep, right? And you don't have to be a very smart investor. You just have to consistently save and invest. And it has helped me in many, many ways, especially in terms of career switch, right? So when I had to make a switch in career from being an internal auditor to going to a newspaper, there was a significant income penalty that I had to take. Guess what? Although I was young and all that, the fact that I had savings, the fact that I had good investments gave me tremendous confidence to try out. Similarly, at different points right now, this plunge into, entrepreneurship, that confidence essentially stems from one, that you can make do with whatever income you have. because you have a certain kind of, lifestyle that you can manage with lesser income. And two, you have sufficient cushion that your investments created that allows you to try new things, fail or succeed, right? You're willing to take that plunge. So I would say for many, at least young investors, this investment, this kind of savings can give you a tremendous cushion to make career switches, to follow your inclination, since many of them want to do different things these days, to follow, your liking and, try new things, provided you have this cushion with you, my, only thing about all of this would be that whatever you do, just do it consistently. End of the day, making a habit of something is what really makes it look great, right? So do it consistently, whether you're into technical trading, stock trading, or you're into long-term investments, or you're into mutual funds. Just do it consistently. And that's why I said I'm a very boring person, because, I just do things consistently.
That's good, right? I think that's the definition of a compounding, right? Whether it's wealth Absolutely. Or talent or skill, it's just doing the same thing over and over again over a really long period of time. And when people see you do it, they say, hey, that looks very easy. But it took you so many decades or so many years to reach there. So excellent. Why don't you tell us some books? And you can choose non-finance books, Vidya, that really shaped you.
Yeah, likely that many people would have read more finance books than me. As a stock enthusiast, I have done all the regular things of reading The Intelligent Investor, reading Peter Lynch and all of those. They have always fascinated me. And but over a period, I must say, I'm a big fan of Ashwath Damodaran, because I understood, financial modeling and, how to look at numbers, from Ashwath Damodaran sheets, which became an open source, decades ago, which was a big deal then, right? So even having access to all of these. So those are things that each of you, if you're inclined to, even kind of pursue, finance as a hobby to understand, should kind of, go through. But other than, the Benjamin Graham and the Peter Lynch's, I would say a few books, again, in line with my own, behavior. This book called Checklist Manifesto by Atul Gawande. That's one of my favorite books. Atul Gawande is a doctor. He talks about preparing checklists before crucial, surgeries. The whole thing is about having checklists to ensure that you are less prone to errors, right? So a plane, for instance, is not run with a checklist, but a plane, any big accident is averted because of a checklist, right? So checklist, when it comes to our own work, especially, if you're talking of traders, day traders or diligent traders.
Processes.
Checklist, yes. So you need to be very, very, very meticulous in what you do. And when you're dealing with numbers analysis, checklist becomes, very important. And that's true of our careers. As an entrepreneur, we have 100 things to do. And, preparing a checklist can really help you at least. You may not finish all of it, but at least you know what's important and what's not, and what needs to be done.
Keeps the anxiety up also. So
exactly. So that's one of, I think, to be disciplined in finance. I think that's a key, and checklist is one of the most vital things to be doing. The other interesting book is the Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell. Obviously, that book taught us a lot about how you become successful. End of the day, what leads you to success, right? And end of the day, while you can have luck, you can have serendipity and all of those, the amount of effort, the amount of work that goes into, the hours of work that goes before a Beethoven is created, or for that matter, before a Warren Buffett, comes, that's something that each of us have to, because the reason why I say this is because things have become a lot more easier, especially in finance and money. You click, and then you invest, and then you think you can click and make money. Everything seems very simple, right? But Outliers is a kind of a sound, place where you realize that nothing comes without effort. Yeah. So is investing. So is, building wealth.
Excellent. Thank you for doing this, Vidya. Listeners, go ahead and visit learnart.com. We have a lot of stuff around what we spoke, especially different styles of investing and trading. You should check that out. And Vidya and her colleagues do some amazing, insightful articles at Prime Investor. I've seen some amazing videos, a lot of write-ups, a lot of research, which is actionable. So do check that out. Thank you so much, Vidya, for your time.
Thanks, Pratik. I had a nice time. Thanks.